Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the virtual opening of the Triple Victory of the 6888. I'm Chris McKeever, Executive Director of the 6th Cavalry Museum, and we are so thrilled to have you join us tonight. We are proud to have received the African American Civil Rights Grant from the National Park Service to tell the amazing story of the 6888 and their time training here at Fort Oglethorpe. Lincoln Penny Films produced a documentary about the 6888, and when I opened the trailer for the film, it begins with one of the veterans saying, "The 6888 Central Postal Directory started in Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia." Of course, we had to learn more, and we're thrilled to have received the grant in April of 2020 so we could tell their story. It is my pleasure to introduce our special guest for tonight's virtual opening, retired Army Colonel Edna Cummings. I met Colonel Cummings last year before COVID hit when the 6888 documentary was shown in Chattanooga. And as the documentary producer, she joined us for a panel discussion following the film. Colonel Cummings is a native of Fayetteville, North Carolina. She operates a Washington, D.C. consulting firm specializing in management and proposal services for federal and commercial clients. She earned her commission as an Army officer through the Reserve Officer Training Corps program at Appalachian State University. Afterwards, she embarked on a distinguished 25-year military career culminating with senior level positions at Georgetown University, the Pentagon, and NORAD. After retiring from the Army, she held management positions for federal contracting companies, where she led Homeland Security and information technology initiatives for federal agencies, including the Department of Defense and the FBI. Currently, she champions the effort and is working with congressional bill sponsors to enact passage of the bipartisan legislation, the 6888 Congressional Gold Medal Act. We want to welcome Colonel Edna Cummings, and she is going to take over the tour from here.
Right. Well, thank you, Christine. It's an honor to be here. You've captured the essence of the 6888. The 6888 was the only African-American Women's Army Corps to serve in Europe during World War II. But keep in mind, there were more than 6,000 African-American women in the Army during World War II. And of that 6,000, 855 were handpicked to go to Europe and clear the male backlog. I have a presentation, Molly can pull that up now, to discuss the 6888 and the legacy that we want to live for the 6888 by working to get them the nation's highest award, the Congressional Gold Medal. Okay, next slide. All right. This is an overview of what I'll cover this evening, and just to highlight the 6888 challenges, accomplishments, and the justification for this Congressional Gold Medal. Okay, next slide. All right. Since the American Revolution, Congress has commissioned gold medals as an expression of its appreciation for distinguished achievements and contributions. You can see on the left, each medal honors a particular individual, institution, or event, and these medals are specially designed for the unit or individual who will receive the award. You see the Tuskegee Airmen, the Women Air Force Service Pilots, the Montford Point Marines, and the Navajo Code Talkers. When the 6888 receives their Congressional Gold Medal, they too will have a unique design designated for their unit. Next. The 6888 Congressional Gold Medal has two bills. One is the Senate Bill 321. It was introduced originally in 2019 by Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas, home of the Buffalo Soldiers. And the 6888 monument is also in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and I'll have a picture of that later. But this bill directs the Speaker of the House and the Senate to award the Congressional Gold Medal. And last year, this bill passed by unanimous consent, however, did not pass the House, And in order for a bill to become law, it has to pass both chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate. So the bill in the Senate side needs 2/3 to pass, or 67 out of 100 senators. Right now, the current Congressional Gold Medal bill has 27 co-sponsors. None of the co-sponsors from Georgia have signed on yet, but I'm sure Christine and Molly will look into that and make that happen. So in the meantime, please contact your senators and ask them to co-sponsor S321. Next slide. The House bill is House Bill 1012. The bill was introduced last year by Representative Moore from Wisconsin. One of our veterans lives in Wisconsin and actually knows Congressman Moore. So she introduced HR 1012. To date, this bill has 61 co-sponsors. It needs 290. And we have 2 members of Congress from Georgia who have co-sponsored, and that's Johnson and Bishop. Yes, Sanford Bishop and Henry Johnson from Georgia have co-sponsored. So we would like for all of the members of Congress from Georgia to co-sponsor the bill. Again, it needs 2/3 majority, 290 of 435. And that's Representative Moore doing one of our House visits on the Hill to discuss the gold medal. Next slide. Okay. Why is the 688 Congressional Gold Medal bill so important? And why does the 688 deserve the Congressional Gold Medal? As I mentioned, it is the highest award in the nation. Basically, the 688 prevailed where others failed. Other members of the military attempted to clear the backlog of mail, but no one else could do it. So the 688 was the only military unit that was able to clear the backlog to improve the morale of more than 7 million Americans serving in the European theater of operations. And this includes military, civilians, aid workers, anybody in the European theater of war during World War II. The 688 helped route their mail. They were the only military unit that exceeded performance standards. The Army gave the 688 6 months to clear the backlog, and they cleared the backlog of mail in 3 months instead of the 6-month goal. When awarded, they will be the only female military unit to receive the Congressional Gold Medal. On the previous slide, you saw the women's air service pilots receive the Congressional Gold Medal. However, when they served during World War II, they were volunteers. They were not considered part of the military, and they did not receive full veteran status until 1977. And lastly, the 688 will be the only African-American Women's Army Corps unit to receive this honor. Next slide. All right. During World War II, the goal of women supporting the military was to release men for combat. The Army had about 150,000, and I will not go over this list, but the Army had more women on active duty than any other service. There were more than 350,000 women supporting the effort for the military. And on the right, there are some other women outside the 688, the Japanese women, the Nisei women, the Code Girls. These were cryptographers who volunteered to break code for the military. And then, of course, the Rosie the Riveters. So there's a note here at the bottom that says approximately 5 million civilian women serve the defense industry and elsewhere in the commercial sector known as Rosie the Riveters. And about 600,000 Black women served as Rosies. And that's something that I learned since working on this project with the 688. Next slide. This is an overview of the creation of the Women's Army Corps. And it began in 1941 with the bill to create the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. And First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune advocated for African-American women to join the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps as enlisted personnel and as officers. In July 42, this is the auxiliary for the Women's Army Corps. Recruits underwent 6 weeks of basic training at Fort Des Moines. And on the left, Charity Adams was the first Black WAC, or the first Women's Army Auxiliary Corps officer. And then in July 1943, the Women's Army Corps was created and was not disbanded until 1978. Next. In World War II, there were limits of Black women to serve in the Army. They dubbed themselves as the 10 percenters because the recruiting was limited to 10%, which reflected the African-American population at the time. And as I mentioned before, the 855-member 688 was the only African-American Women's Army Corps unit to serve overseas. They served from February 45 until 46. Next. As I mentioned, there were more than 6,000 Black women on active duty during World War II. While the 688 was overseas, the Black WACs in the United States received very harsh treatment. Many of them were imprisoned, court-martialed, and accused of not fulfilling their military duties. In 45, we had 4 Black WACs who participated in a strike at Fort Devens, and they opted to take a court-martial rather than accept discriminatory work assignments. And one of the women actually committed suicide who was part of this strike. And in 45, WACs were beaten for sitting in a room designated for whites only. Okay, next. These are some of the duty stations where the WACs served throughout the United States. And you see Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. We had WACs to serve at Fort Oglethorpe. However, Fort Oglethorpe also was the overseas training location for the 688. And thanks to research by Molly and Christine, I understand it was a classified mission because no one knew why the WACs were training at Fort Oglethorpe. We knew that these Black women were there training for some reason, which later we found out was the 688 mission. Next. As Christine mentioned, we happened to meet last year when we screened the documentary, and I was so impressed with the tour that I received from the interpretive park ranger, Brian Autry, and Christine. And this is an idea of some of the training sites that the 688, some of the training areas the 688 underwent while they were at Fort Oglethorpe. And Brian will do a great job in showing all of that to you. He actually gave me some of these charts that lays out the training sites and locations where the 688 trained for 2 weeks before they went to Europe. Okay, next. All right. Once they left Fort Oglethorpe, the 688 went back to Camp Shanks, New York to ready themselves for departure. Okay. These are just some of the women who were striking a pose before they departed overseas. Okay, next. All right. So the women were faced with combat situations early on. Their boats, they went over in 2 groups, on the Ile de France and the Queen Elizabeth, and they were chased by German U-boats, which was something that the Army tried to prevent, and that was one reason why the Fort Oglethorpe, the training location, was not widely publicized, because they were trying to keep the information away from the enemy at the time. And then when they arrived to Europe, V-bombs went off because the 688, even though they arrived after D-Day, D-Day did not end the war. The war did not end until September. So as I mentioned in the documentary, the 688 were faced with a wartime situation early on. Next slide. So prior to the 688's arrival, under the heading of personnel problems, since D-Day and for a long time prior to that date, a shortage of qualified postal officers existed in the European theater. And the Postal Division attempted several times to get the backlog of mail cleared out. And here's a picture of some white wax trying to clear the mail out. And there'd been men, women, everyone tried to clear that backlog consisting of millions of pieces of mail. Next. Just some other pictures of the chaotic mail operations. Again, 7 million Americans in the European theater of operations, undelivered Christmas packages, and the mail did not stop, and the troops were moving throughout Europe rapidly, so it's hard to keep up with the troop movement. And many of the military personnel had common names. You see about 7,500 Robert Smiths, Buster Jr. So the 688 had to figure out how to route this mail. And again, one general predicted that the backlog in Birmingham alone would take 6 months to process. Okay, next slide. All right. So I did this similar to a military case study, and the conditions the women worked in were very austere: cold, dirty, rat-infested aircraft hangars, broken windows, but they had blackout curtains to prevent enemy detection. To solve the problem, the 688 organized into 3 shifts and routed mail based on serial numbers more than the addresses. Sometimes they had to open the mail to determine the serial number of the individual. If they could not deliver the mail, they would return it undelivered after 30 days. That's what I was told by some of the veterans we talked to. So the results, they processed 65,000 pieces of mail per shift, and that's about 195,000 pieces of mail per 24 hours for 90 days straight, which is over 17 million pieces of mail. Then they proceeded on to Rouen and Paris, France, to clear that mail backlog. Next. And here's a chain of command. On the left, you can see that President Roosevelt was the commander-in-chief, or the president, followed by Truman. Roosevelt died in April 45, I believe. And on the right, the 688 chain of command led by Major Charity Adams. And one of the veterans, Lieutenant Griffin, I have her highlighted, lives in Tempe, Arizona. She turns 101 this year. Okay, next. And this is some more information about Major Adams. I connected to the story because her name was Edna, and I read about an African-American female colonel who said things that she probably shouldn't have and regretted them, but she got the job done. So needless to say, I connected a lot with this story. Charity Adams was a highly respected individual. She was a high school valedictorian, had a triple major in mathematics, Latin, and physics from Wilberforce, and she received her master's in vocational psychology from Ohio State. She was reprimanded for race mixing after accepting an invitation to an officers club, and one statement that became part of her legacy is a general approached her when they arrived in Birmingham, England, and asking to inspecting the troops. She did not want to interrupt the shift patterns, so she told the general, "Over my dead body," and she just knew she was going to be court-martialed. But nothing happened, and he earned her respect. She also refused segregated recreational facilities in Europe. In December 45, she was promoted to lieutenant colonel. Basically, she made colonel in 4 years. It took me 18 years to make lieutenant colonel, a little bit longer for 06. So at the end of World War II, she was the highest ranking Black female officer in the Army. Next. Okay. In Birmingham, England, the women, the 688, were free to do pretty much everything that they wanted within the city of Birmingham. They were welcomed by the locals. They formed sports teams and entertainment groups. And what was interesting, they were self-sustaining. The Army had them segregated to the extent they had to set up a mini city. We call it garrison. So they performed all of their tasks, cooking, logistics, and it just is a testament to the leadership of Major Adams, because she had to identify the skills of all of these women and assign them accordingly. So even though the Army was segregated, life in Birmingham, England, allowed them some freedoms that they did not have within the United States. Okay, next. Okay. After Birmingham, England, the 688 relocated to France. This iconic photo is the Joan of Arc parade. And what was interesting, in France, the military police, the female military police, were not allowed to carry weapons. So Major Adams arranged martial arts or jujitsu for them to ward off curious onlookers, because they were such a novelty, they attracted a lot of attention. In July 1945, 3 blacks were killed in a Jeep accident in Rouen, France. And there are 4 women buried in Normandy, and the 3 of the 4 women are from the 688. The wind down started in August 45, and then in September 45, World War II ended with the Japanese surrender, the USS Missouri. And in 46, the 688 was deactivated in New Jersey. Next. So when the 688 was deactivated, there was no recognition for their service other than the campaign medals, and some of the women did not receive the campaign medals until decades later. So 75 years later, the 688 is finally being recognized. I started with the 688 Monument Project that was dedicated at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in November 2018. Senator Moran also worked with us to award the unit their only commendation award, the Meritorious Unit Commendation, and the documentary. Okay, next. It was a blue plaque dedicated by the U.S. Ambassador to the United Kingdom, Robert Johnson Center. The embassy paid for our production team to come over and screen the documentary throughout the United Kingdom and dedicate the blue plaque. So there's a blue plaque in Birmingham, England. And as of now, there are 8 known veterans to be alive. And it's crucial that the 688 Congressional Gold Medal is awarded very soon because of the age of the women. And it's just the right thing to do, because this is one of our nation's legacy units that was not recognized, and they contributed so much and opened the doors for so many, not just African-American women, but just women, period, in the military. The Army was the first to allow Black women in the military, and so they opened the doors for the other services to allow Black women to serve. Next. This is just a few pictures from our trip in the United Kingdom. The gentleman on the lower left, that's Jim Ferris, the executive producer. That's me in the middle, and that's the deputy superintendent of Normandy. And the picture in the middle is one of the beaches of Normandy, and that's a German bunker that I enjoyed walking through. It was amazing that these infrastructures are still standing, and like little underground cities almost, just the complexity of some of those structures over 70 plus years, and they're still standing. Okay, next. We lost some veterans and cast members since we made the documentary. Next. Okay. You saw Mrs. Barker Johnson, if you saw her in the documentary. She has an interesting story. When she returned from the war, she used her GI Bill to attend Winston-Salem State University in North Carolina, and she was the first woman to attend Winston-Salem State on the GI Bill. But when she graduated, she got a job, and her principal would not let her go back to march. So I contacted Winston-Salem State, and 70 years later, she walked across stage, and this made national headlines. It was on Today's Show, and other networks picked it up. And so she passed last year, August 23rd. Next. You saw Coach Thompson. When I was in the Army, I had the opportunity to teach ROTC at Georgetown, and I met Coach Thompson, became very good friends. And when I told him about the project, he gave me the name of his cousin. and she was a member of the 688. And he just recalled how inspirational his cousin was and how much that influenced him to do something else with his life instead of what some of the other kids were doing. So he ultimately left a legacy of his own. And that's the producer, Jim Theris, with Coach Thompson during the interview. Next. Miss Indiana Hunt Martin, she's in the iconic photo. Her story is very interesting as well. Before she joined the 688, she worked in a building that housed the Manhattan Project. And the Manhattan Project was this classified project, building bombs and some other things that nobody talked about at the time. So if you look up Manhattan Project, she worked in the TNT factory that was part of that project. Very interesting story. And she had a lot of good information to share. A lot of our newspaper articles actually from her personal files. Okay, next. All right. How you can help, as I mentioned, for the Congressional Gold Medal, here are the bill numbers. Contact your member of Congress and ask them to co-sponsor Senate Bill 321 and House Bill 1012. And if your organization would like to send a letter of support just for organizations, you may send your letters of support to bill sponsors, and those letters do make a difference, because when you send a letter, the bill sponsors and members of Congress are aware of the public support from large organizations, and they share these letters with other members of Congress to encourage their support. And there's also a link where you can see the list of names. It's a by-state list of names, so you can see where the women joined the 688. Okay. Next. All right. I will not go over this summary, but just keep in mind there were more than 6,000 Black women in the Army at the time during World War II. Over 350,000 women served in or with the military, and Black recruiting was limited to 10%. And again, I'll go over some of these, I've gone over some of these areas, so I will not read this again, but I like to call the 688, this is something I've come up with, I haven't seen any place else, but I refer to as a mobile tactical postal team, MTPT, because the military now has a lot of mobile teams. So I reflected on the service of the 688, and that's what it reminds me of, a mobile tactical postal team, just going around from base to base, city to city, clearing the backlog of mail and improving the morale of Americans throughout the European theater of operations. Next. Okay, and here's some references and media not inclusive. And I've read all of these books and have spoken with the authors. The Glory in Their Spirit is a book about the women who within the United States were court-martialed. The next book is One Woman's Army by the Commander Charity Adams Early, Brenda Moore and Cheryl Mullenbach, the Double Victory Campaign, and some other references. We received quite a lot of coverage by the media, but more importantly, the women who were still alive were able to share their stories. Okay, next. Okay, so if you want to contact me on social media, like, post, share. My 28-year-old cousin taught me how to communicate in social media terms. She says, you need to have an ask. So my ask is to follow me on social media, learn more about the 688, message me if you have any questions. I'll do my best to respond. And that's it. So I hope you learned something about the 688, a little bit more information that was not in the documentary. So now we'll open the floor, or not the floor, we'll open the cyber world to questions.
We're actually going to hold questions for the very
okay.
end. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Chris real quick.
Okay, great.
Excellent. Thank you, Edna. You did a wonderful job. All that great information. And we truly will send out additional ways to contact our federal officials to make them jump on board to sponsor so that the 6888 gets recognized with a Congressional Gold Medal. But now I get to introduce Molly Sampson. She is the program coordinator here at the museum. She joined us June 1st, and she curated the exhibit. She has put together the program. She knows how to do all this virtual stuff because if I can answer my phone when you call me, I'm doing well. So we're just real excited to have someone of her knowledge and skills. And so she is going to take you through the curator's tour.
Oh, awesome.
So take it away, Molly.
All right, so hold on a second while I get in position to share my screen again. But what we're gonna do is really briefly just go through some of the highlights of the physical exhibit for those of you who won't be able to visit us soon, and kind of give you a teaser of what you'll be seeing. One second. All right, so the triple victory of the 6888, an exhibit by the 6th Cavalry Museum. I picked this name to kind of play off of the Double Victory campaign. The Double V was put forward during World War II by the Black papers, the Black press, to push the way that our male soldiers were fighting both for democracy abroad, but also fighting racism that was homegrown and within the military forces themselves. So by bringing in the fact that it's now the Women's Army Corps that we're focusing on, they're not only fighting to win the war, they're fighting racism, they're fighting sexism as well. So it turns it into a triple victory. So when we started working on this exhibit, one of the things I wanted to do was figure out a way to make ours stand out. Like, why are we telling this story? Why is it important for us to tell us, and what makes our version of it unique? Not that I want to say we're putting a spin on it, just what can we offer that hasn't already been said elsewhere? So how do we tell that holistic story? So we broke it down into 4 sections. We have 4 exhibit cases: Origins of the Corps, Fight for Overseas Service, Training at Fort Oglethorpe, and Serving Overseas. The Origins of the Corps goes into the background of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the transition to the Women's Army Corps, and then how the Black women were treated that entire time, that 10% cap that Edna had mentioned, and how the Black WAC units were utilized prior to the 6888. The Fight for Overseas Service focuses on how Black WACs were given and taken away the opportunity to serve overseas. They asked for it and asked for it and asked for it, and it kept getting denied. And the external forces that advocated for them to have the opportunity to serve overseas, like Mary McLeod Bethune and the National Council for Negro Women. And then Bethune used her dear friend Eleanor Roosevelt to help turn those screws as well, to say, hey, you know, I'm the first lady, maybe you should listen to me. And how that all worked to finally, by the end of 1944, the War Department approved that a Black female unit could be sent overseas to serve in the Postal Directory. Exhibit case number 3, Training at Fort Oglethorpe, is obviously our connection, how we tie in why Northwest Georgia has such a good connection to this unit. And as Chris mentioned at the very beginning, this was where it all started. This was the first place they all came together as one unit. And so we go through what their 2 weeks consisted of, their experiences, both positive and negative, here at Fort Oglethorpe. And then we also introduce Abby Noel Campbell at that point. The 4th case, Serving Overseas, is kind of self-explanatory in the name. And this covers their time after their arrival in Glasgow, their service in Birmingham, their move across the Channel, and their service to the continent through the end of the war. And one of the things I liked is we had the ability to include details not highlighted elsewhere. I am very much a detail person, and I think it kind of shows in the exhibit. Chris can attest to me fighting for lots of details to be included. And one of those is shown on this slide, What's in a Name? It's one of our wall panels in between the exhibit cases themselves. And one of the things I like is, though we call them the 6888, they actually weren't known as that for a little over a month.
That's right.
So while they were here at Fort Oglethorpe, they were known as the Extended Field Service Training Battalion. That is a huge mouthful, but that's what every unit that was here for overseas training was called. So the Extended Field Service Training Battalion for 2 weeks. And then when they left, they were given a shipment designation. So RT-510-C. Again, not something that's easy to say, but finding that and realizing like, oh, yep, they went by this for a little bit. And then when they arrived in Birmingham, the unit was again renamed, and they were called the Provisional Battalion Attached to First Base Post Office. Again, another unwieldy name. And at this point in Charity Adams' book, she says, we just called ourselves the battalion and everybody knew what we meant. So a lot of the exhibit texts, I call them the unit, the battalion, because their name changed so many times until they got that official 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion designation in March of 1945 that they would keep until March of 1946 when the unit was disbanded. So the rest of this brief curator's tour is going to highlight some of the physical artifacts featured in the exhibit and why we picked them to include. So origin of the Corps, again, this is the beginning of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, how we included Black women from the get-go. So the items we picked for this one really focus on the esprit de corps, what the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, what the Women's Army Corps was. So we have 2 examples of the Pallas Athena in 2 different forms. This guidon is an original from our collection, and it features the Pallas Athena, the branch insignia of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps and later Women's Army Corps. Pallas Athena was the Greek goddess of wisdom and arts of war. So it's actually the same insignia of the Canadian Women's Army Corps. So we were thinking the same thing as the Canadians on that one. But I love this because this is what the units marching across the parade field right outside our doors would have had. The other item we have is this facsimile recruiting pamphlet. And this is from early 1943, before the conversion, as you can see by the use of the word auxiliary. And this focuses on how we can get civilian women to join the Corps. So again, they're pushing that branch insignia, back of the fighting front, using this really evocative language to encourage women to enlist, to do their patriotic duty, to step outside the homes and put on the uniform. One of the interesting things, and it's actually open in the exhibit case right now, is there are no Black women represented. There was no diversity in the recruiting pamphlets used. It's all this very movie star type white woman that you see featured in all of it. So even though we want to attract Black women, it's still very limited. We have that 10% rule. We're not going to show them in our recruiting pamphlets. And it kind of helps tie in how the discrimination was part of the Corps from the get-go. It was the nature of the beast. Our second one, fight for overseas service. So again, we're focusing on some of those external factors. How are we going to get Black WACs overseas? Who are the key players that need to encourage the War Department, encourage the leadership of the Women's Army Corps to say, yes, it's time, yes, we approve this. We also, in this exhibit, introduced Willie Bell Urban. And while we've never had the opportunity to meet Willie Bell Urban, she passed on, we feel very close to her. Her daughter, her family came to the screening last year. Chris met Brenda then and formed that relationship. And so we have this beautiful photo of Willie Bell Urban. She was from Moultrie, Georgia. She enlisted in the Women's Army Corps and then volunteered for overseas service. So she was part of the first group of the 6/888 to go overseas. And then the physical artifacts we have in this exhibit to tie in are the hobby hat, again, from our collection. It matches the one in this gorgeous photo of her from her graduation for basic training at Des Moines. And then we also have her service ribbons, campaign ribbons, her good conduct ribbon, and the commendation certificates to go with that. Also in this exhibit, to tie in with those external forces, we have a facsimile of this really great letter that Eleanor Roosevelt wrote to Ovida Culp Hobby, director of the Women's Army Corps. And it kind of hits a couple different topics. She's talking about recruiting, bringing in the junior league, but the last paragraph is, I have also had an inquiry as to whether or not colored WACs are going to get a chance to serve overseas. They are very anxious to go, and I should think now they would be very useful in some of the places where there are colored troops. So not language we would use today, but this is the language that Eleanor Roosevelt used in 1944. And that they are very anxious to go just is so evocative. Like, give them this chance. They want to serve their country in the full capacity as the rest of the Women's Army Corps. The other thing that really ticked it off that made it is the date, May 4th. As the 6th Cavalry Museum, May 4th is the date the 6th Cavalry was created. It's also my birthday, in case anybody wants to write that down for later. So it hit on a couple levels. And then we're going to switch to our exhibit number 3, Training at Fort Oglethorpe. So again, we focus on that 2-week period. What were their experiences here? The overseas training was serving multiple purposes. They were getting reissue of uniforms. They were going through physical and psychological examinations to make sure that they could handle serving overseas in a theater of war. They were getting medical treatment, new glasses, things like that as needed. And then a lot of physical training. The end of the 2-week period actually culminated in an 8-mile field march around the national park, and they would carry field gear like this. So this is an assemblage of field gear that a WAC would have carried in 1945. It's a musette bag, combat suspenders, pistol belt, a lightweight gas mask bag, canteen and cup, and first aid kit. When it was fully packed, it weighed in excess of 30 pounds, which doesn't seem like much when guys today are talking about 80-pound ruck packs, but 30 pounds on 8 miles, trust me, it adds up after a little bit. So this just kind of shows you what they would have all been carrying. Now, serving overseas, I think, has some of the most exciting artifacts in it. What you're seeing on the screen right now are 2 examples of envelopes that are ones that feasibly the 688 could have actually handled. When I was searching for them, I wanted to find envelopes from that 2-year backlog, that 1943, early 1945 period. And while these look like very messy, scribbled upon envelopes, there's a reason for it. So if you look, they both have stamps that say Directory Search, First Base Post Office. So this is where the 6888 started, was First Base Post Office. So these went through that directory. They were undelivered. The one on the left says Tri Headquarters 2695 Regiment, and that's scribbled out. Not at SHAEF. It's stamped multiple times. Not here, not there. The other one says try this hospital, which I think, again, is just, it gives me chills every time I think about it. Like, no one knows where this person was. Was he injured? So they're searching the hospitals trying to find him. So the 6888 ended up revamping not only the time they spent in operations. It had been a 20-hour schedule, and they bumped it up to a 24-hour schedule of operations. They also streamlined the locator cards and were more active on updating those. So again, they could have handled these. I can't prove it, but they're at least good representations of what they would have had. We also have a mail bag. This is one of the smaller mail bags, but if you look at the original photos, the film footage of them from April 1945, you'll see very similar mail bags. So just kind of put it into context and make it a little more tangible for visitors as to like what these would have been and how many letters would fit in one of them. And then this final image is a jacket that actually belonged to a member of the 6888. It's on loan to us from England. Special thanks to Sophie Green for lending it to us for the exhibit. So it is named to Grace Varon. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to find much information on Grace, but the Brenda Moore book that Edda mentioned earlier, Grace is listed in that. She's on the unit roster. We've been able to find her enlistment record. She was originally from Chicago. And then this is an ETO jacket. It means European Theater of Operations jacket. It was kind of the women's version of the Ike jacket and was created to better accommodate the cold, wet weather of Europe and make things a little more bearable, especially during that very cold winter of 1944 to 1945. So again, that's just a very brief curator's tour focusing on the artifacts. If you have more questions, we're getting to that in just a second. For more information after this, please visit us online at 6cavalrymuseum.org/6888. And then again, we're able to make this exhibit possible with help from the African American Civil Rights Grant Program through the National Park Service.
Great.
So at this point, we do have a Q&A option through the chat. So please feel free to ask questions there, and then we'll answer those. We have about 12 more minutes left of the presentation. All right, first one. Are there any 6888 specific artifacts that you know of located in museums or research institutions elsewhere? Okay, so there is actually this really great small museum in Dayton, Ohio, Miami Military Museum. I can pull up the link and send that in a follow-up email after this, but they have Charity Adams belongings. They have her uniforms, her overseas bag there. So that next time I'm home in Ohio, I'm hoping to be able to go check that out. And then my favorite 6888 artifact on exhibit here is the ETO jacket. Because I love WAC uniforms. I especially love ETO jackets. And then the fact that Sophie was so kind to let us borrow it, it definitely really just sends it over the edge. What was the most difficult aspect of creating the exhibit? Probably narrowing down the information.
Yes. The exhibit could have taken over half of the museum. There's so much, we read the books, looked at everything. There are just so many personal stories that you want to tell. And that's why we keep recommending that you read the books, and that'll give you an up close and personal look at what the ladies went through. But narrowing the focus.
Yes, yes. All right. Do you have any information on the 3 6888 members buried in the Normandy Cemetery? Edna, do you want to address that one?
Well, I actually spoke with the nephew of Mary Barlow. And these women died when they were in their 20s. And so he says just not a lot of information available about them. And it's interesting, I just start looking at obituaries of the family names, and I was able to find a relative, and he was gracious enough, to speak with me. And I did ask that question. And he says, well, she was 26 when she died. So we don't have any information on her. She didn't have a family, she wasn't married. So very little information is available other than just the basics, when they enlisted, because at 25, 26 years old, there's just not a lot out there.
Well, and to build off of what Edna said about the basics, one of the hurdles in studying any of this was the National Archives fire in the 1970s that took out so many service records. So a lot of this will get enlistment records, which gives you barely any information. And then trying to research women using just their maiden names is also a hurdle. Not knowing if they married or if they did, what their married names were, kind of adds an extra layer of challenge to it. All right, the next one is, how did I approach finding the letters? What did I search and where did they come from? eBay is my friend. And I started very, very vague with World War II envelopes and went from there. They were both happy accidents. I think it was within the first couple days I started looking for them, and I found them both like within an hour of each other and realized they both had the first base post office stamp. And I was like, all right, we're good. We got 2. All right, any other questions? We have a few more minutes. We can answer those.
Yeah, what I would like to add is you mentioned the Black Press and the Double Victory campaign. One of the members of the 6888, her father founded the oldest Black newspaper, the Afro newspaper, and I was able to locate a lot of articles going through the archives. And what's also interesting is that we were able to find about 6 more names because we knew there were 855 women. The monument, we only had 844, I believe. And so we were able to locate some additional names because of the Black press, because as you mentioned, the mainstream press of the white media did not cover the 6888, the Black women, the Black soldiers, very, very few articles, because that's another reason why you see the same photos. There are a couple of iconic photos when it comes to the Black women who served in World War II. And not a 6888 member, I actually had the opportunity to meet a World War II veteran, Ms. Bailey. She turns 100, and I think she's 103. and lives in Maryland. And for her birthday, she went skydiving. And she knew of Major Adams at the time because Charity Adams was at Fort Des Moines. But Ms. Bailey got out of the military in 45 and did not know about, so much about the 6 AAA. She just got out and started. So it's just interesting catching up with her because she gave me information prior to the 6 AAA and mentioned that Charity was not the only one who was almost court-martialed. She had a few words with white officers, but she says, we knew the rules. We knew what the articles of war stated, and we would not violate those just so we could get our girls in trouble. So just amazing. At 103, she could still recall those details.
All right, one more. Is there any information about how other Black troops in the UK and French armies received the 6 AAA? Edna, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, when we were in the UK, there's an organization called Recognize. His name is Gary Stewart, and he does a lot of research about the Afro-Caribbean soldiers. And based on his research, the 6 AAA were welcomed by the Europeans more so than they were, by their own country and the military. And so there were not a lot of issues. As a matter of fact, a lot of the Black women in the local area and those aid workers, you had other Blacks in the European theater of operations would come to the 6 AAA because the 6 AAA has set up hair salons. So the experience in Europe was very pleasant and welcoming, again, more so than the segregated armed forces and the United States.
All right, and I'm going to take this very last one.
Mm-hmm.
Are there many pictures of Fort Oglethorpe when these women were there? So this is actually one of my favorite little hurdles. So we are in the early stages of working on the exhibit, and it's like, oh, well, we need photos of the 6 AAA while they were at Fort Oglethorpe. But I'm like, probably not going to find any.
No.
So this is a fun little thing about overseas training, and looking at other memoirs from other WACs who went through overseas training here. Overseas training was such a specialized and secretive training,
right?
Because the War Department didn't want outside sources to know if you were training for overseas. And even while you were in overseas training, you didn't necessarily know where you were headed. So it was so secretive, you were not to take any photos here. Your letters were censored at a higher degree than they would be for the women here in basic training. You really weren't supposed to keep journals while you were here, and you weren't supposed to keep journals once you went overseas either, because it was all such a matter of military security. And I mentioned earlier that overseas training, they went through refresher, and one of the refreshers was military security and how to keep things secret. So that's why there's no photos of the 6 AAA while they were here. And that part of the exhibit, we now have just the field gear stuff as opposed to really cool photos of them doing cool overseas training.
You can mark it classified.
Yes, very classified. All right, and I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
Yes, Chris.
Well, thank you again, Edna, for your service to our country and for sharing your knowledge of the 6 AAA with us tonight. Your dedication to them is inspiring. I also want to thank Molly Sampson, our program coordinator. She has done an excellent job curating the exhibit and taking us on such an impressive virtual tour. This is the first virtual tour the museum has ever done. So if it depended on Chris McKeever to get it done, you all would be trying to call me by phone. I'd show you a picture like this and we'd be good to go. So we are so glad to have Molly here and all of her talents. We want to thank everyone for joining us as well. And now that you've seen firsthand the great work that's being done at the 6th Cavalry Museum, I hope you'll go to our website and sign up for our newsletter and follow us on Facebook. And I would also encourage you to show your support of the museum and to our mission to share history for all. You can support us by donating online through Amazon Smiles or by joining our 1919 Club. So from Edna, Molly, and I, we want you to enjoy your evening. And Molly and I will be here 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to welcome all of our local friends to come and see the exhibit firsthand. And we want you to have a great evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. We'll be sending a follow-up email with some more of the information from the presentation, like how to contact your local congressperson and remind them that they need to be supporting this Congressional Gold Medal. And then we'll send links on how to sign up for the newsletter and some more information online about the 6888. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great job.